Who's our new minutes lady?
Oh, that's sexist.
Okay, councillors, they're being reported now. So welcome everybody to the agenda briefing session for February in advance of the council meeting next week. I want to first of all acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the town of Bassendean was founded, so the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their ongoing contribution to our community and culture here. And I also just want to remind people that our session tonight is recorded and live streamed so that people who are unable to attend can still access the proceedings here this evening. So, attendances and apologies. We have an apology from Mr. Brian Reid, who's on leave, and Mr. Christian Butler is here in his place, and also an apology from Ken Lapham. We also have Alex Snappett, Jeff Solms from Environmental Health Office team. We have Rhonda and Renee from HR joining us this evening, and they'll be giving us some briefings on some of the reports later on. Are there any deputations that you've had requests for? No. Great. Any declarations of interest from councillors on any of the agenda items?
Impartiality interest for the Eden Hill funding item.
Because your sister is the chair?
Yeah.
And an impartiality interest on the proposed animals, environment, nuisance, pests and local law as I have chickens.
Well,
very attached to
them. In that case, so do I.
Very attached.
Okay. No addresses by members of the public tonight, so we'll move straight on to the reports.
Sorry, Mayor.
Yes.
Can I just go to item 2? I just wanted to let you know that I'll be away between Thursday and Sunday of this week, out of the state.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the reports. The first one is the Broadway Shared Park, and councillors probably have a paper copy that Mr. Stuart Dawkins has just circulated. It wasn't actually in the agenda, the main agenda. Did you want to comment on this report in advance?
Yes, look just as an explanation as to why it's been tabled this evening. There was officers who were ill last week, and so the officer, the engineering technical officer, wasn't able to produce the report. Ken was also ill last week, so we had a discussion with the mayor, and it was resolved that what we would do is try and get a report to this briefing session. So we would attach it to the councillor's bulletin, which we did, and the document which or the report which we've provided on the table tonight is simply a hard copy, so that you have that in front of you. So we've tried to do that to progress this particular item. The other two documents which were provided, the actual layout plan, that was provided to councillors back in, there's two-sided by the way, that was provided to councillors back in December, but we've actually got some other written comments on it. And that plan will be provided to the town hopefully by this Thursday, so that it'll go out with the agenda. And also the costings report was also provided at the last meeting. Confidential.
I think all the staff are feeling better. So
yeah. Ken and David are back, but so Ken's here to probably, and myself are here to answer any questions in regards to the item.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you want to add, Mr. Carter, before councillors ask questions?
No.
Questions? Councillor Gadget.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question. My understanding, I just wanted to just get clarification that this was a 50-50 project, so we contribute 50% of the costs.
No. So originally they estimated 550,000 with us contributing 100.
Oh, okay.
Outlines
better than 50-50.
Oh, but it's deteriorated.
Oh,
yeah.
That's what I'm just asking. I'm just
so that was one of my questions as well. So in the report, I think it was 325 now, the estimate cost, and they were still expecting the town to contribute 100,000 towards that.
That's correct. Basically, initially when the proposal was put up, and prior to undertaking concept drawings and drawings of the project, they anticipated looking at a project totaling about $450,000. Out of that, they sought funds from the town of Bassendean to support to go that. In the initial council meeting, council resolved to provide 100,000 to that project. Since then, the project has been undertaking its drawings and costs for undertaking their work, and some of the modifications put into it, and the current cost is $340,000, and the town still has that $100,000 to put that if they want to.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton?
Through the Mayor. My recollection of the first time this came to us, which I think was in March, followed by the second time it came to us was in May, that the project total was $550,000. And I worked that out as being 18%. Our share of $100,000 would work out to 18% of $550,000. So my question is, and during the actual site visit, I went there along with the Mayor and the CEO, and I recall speaking to one of the representatives, and I asked if there would be the facility to actually express our share of the payment in a percentage rather than $100,000. I thought that would be dealt with before we actually got the report. So I am curious as to whether that can actually happen, whether we can express our share as 18% of the total rather than $100,000, because obviously the expenditure on our part would be less then.
Unfortunately, I wasn't at the meeting that you were talking to that person, but the conversations that we've had with PTA on this issue is that basically it was a contribution that the town would provide in the initial list of $100,000. And you may be right, I might err and say it was $550,000, but I haven't got that detail with me at the moment. Yeah. The last conversation we've had with PTA is basically around the price that we actually put into that concept, into that project, and the price they are prepared to put into the contract as well, into the project as well. And I'm not too sure whether that detail has been put to the PTA. I'll follow that up tomorrow.
Actually, sorry.
Can I just add, the price that we're talking about at the moment is a pre-tender cost. So once it's actually gone out to tender, we'll have a more accurate view of what the cost of the project, the true cost of the project will be. It may be less, it may be more, but I guess at this stage what we've got is a ballpark figure, and the town of Bassendean, as I understand, has put $100,000 on the table, and that's been formalised. If it does come in under, I think there is an opportunity there to negotiate with the PTA.
Councillor Wilson?
So were any staff at the meeting with residents?
Yes.
Who should I direct my question to? So I've had a number of residents on that street contact me, and I'm just wondering if the feedback that I've received matched up to the feedback that was given at the meeting. So what was the community sentiment about the project, and any other ideas or improvements get expressed?
Certainly I think, and I arrived probably 5 minutes late and things had already kicked off, but I got a sense that most of the questions were around more understanding what was being proposed and what was not going to be included in the project. PTA were quite clear about what wouldn't be included in the project. So I think certainly my impression from the local residents was trying to get a sense of what would be provided by the PTA, which was probably somewhat different to the diagrams that had been put on the table previously.
I think at the beginning of this discussion, at that walkthrough, which we didn't actually walk anywhere in the end, but we met on site, people had seen the original diagrams, and so some people had that in their mind, and then people were thinking bigger picture for their street and their area and what they wanted, and we're talking about traffic calming and trees and all sorts of things that weren't inside the scope as PTA was proposing, or Department of Transport I should say. But as the discussion progressed, I think people developed an understanding that PTA had this limited scope, and it was either going to be we accepted that or not. And I got the sense that as it progressed, people went, oh, something is better than nothing, and that's where it kind of finished off. Would you agree that that's...
Yes.
And we discussed a lot about the fact that we're doing this visioning process throughout this year, and that we'll have a bigger picture plan for, you know, the whole town after that. But at this point in time, we don't have that plan for each little area of the town. So in order for us to be able to do these projects in the way that the community would ideally like us to, we need to have that plan in place. And unfortunately, at this point in time, we've had something come from the state government, which, you know, going great, and funding is excellent, but to fit that into our town's vision, that piece is missing at this point in time. Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Could I just ask, I can't recall off the top of my head, Mr. Cardi, maybe you can. How much did it cost us to do the work down Shackleton Street with the trees and centre islands? Can you recall how much that was?
You're separating the roadworks and the tree works in the middle?
Yeah, so the whole lot, the whole... Do you have...
No,
I can't recall either at the top of my head.
I can find that.
Oh, if you could, that'd be handy, thank you.
So on the issue of traffic calming and medium strip tree planting, earlier discussions have led me to understand that if we were to go ahead with this proposal, there would not be enough room to put in effective traffic calming measures or do medium strip tree planting. Is that still the case with the current drawings?
In discussions with our engineering and technical coordinator, there are opportunities to look at different types of traffic management devices in that area, but it will not be part of this project. We would have to look at how we could do that at a future date, because the cost of doing that would be increasing cost, because the outside of the road, where the road limitation is now, we'd have to increase going into the verge a little bit to allow for more traffic calming devices to be placed in it. So the cost would be there and increase the whole thing. PTA not participating.
So, Councillor Wilson, at the meeting, this was discussed because obviously we've made our position clear that is what we would like, ideally, to have the centre islands with tree plantings, all sorts of reasons, including traffic calming. But the original diagrams that we were presented with, that Council was keen on pursuing, hadn't taken into account that the bus used that street, and so that required an extra width. And when they did their detailed designs and realised that they needed to take that into account, that's when it became apparent that the centre islands with plantings was not able to be accommodated without widening the road at the town's expense.
So if we were to go ahead with this proposal, that would lock us out from doing medium strip tree planting in the future. Is that
knock us out from
being able to do medium strip tree planting in the future because they wouldn't do enough space? Is that
you'd have, in order to, in the future, provide a medium strip in that road, you'd have to take some land off the verge, and what our assessment of that site is that there's already some stubble planted, and the trees that are close to the edge of the road, it would impact those trees.
I think the question is, though, that if we didn't put in the bike lane,
yes,
we would have that additional width, which then we could potentially put centre plantings. Is that correct, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, if you'd like to.
So we would spend $100,000 to prevent us from being able to do planting in the future. Is that what we're being asked to do?
Just to follow up on that, when you put a medium island in the middle, you don't have to put it all the way down. So in a new design, if we would decide, the town would decide to go down this way in the future, there is a possibility to do it spasmodically, winding up the road, not the entire road at a given time, so we could endeavour to design in middle islands or traffic management to take the both at a later date. But within this current project, it's not.
Councillor Hamilton?
Just following on from that point, my understanding is that the road width was we were originally told it was 10.5 metres, but it's down to 9.2 9.6 or 9.7 metres, which again reduced it. Then my understanding is that the bike paths would be 1.25 on either side, then a 30mm painted line, and then there's 3.3 metres for each lane for the buses. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but many of the residents wanted something to actually slow the traffic down, because traffic does speed, particularly coming off Railway Parade going down towards Bayswater. That's the other direction they don't have to speed. So
to put in traffic management, and I will say usually this type of project, having a street light, actually slows down the traffic because of the different type of constructions that's made for a bicycle lane. Tends to slow it down a touch anyhow. But if council decides to later on down the track, we wouldn't have to modify a part of an area to just slow the place, because you'd have to take an option that the town would have to take.
Can I just ask, in terms of roads that have been identified as priorities for traffic calming, would this have been one that we would have been doing some work on if this project had not been presented to us?
Under our submersion plan, this is not a road at the current time that we
or traffic calming, you mean?
for traffic calming.
Under the asset management plan, when is this section of road next due to be resurfaced? You can take that.
Yeah, we have to go this.
Just a question. You know my thoughts on the combination of traffic calming devices and the planting of trees, but have FISA been consulted in any of this? One of their real big bugbears is lack of access to streets if they do have an emergency situation or a house fire. There's whole streets that have been identified that the big fire units actually can't get into, not in our suburb, but in other suburbs, because they haven't been consulted. Has that been included in our thinking?
Part of the development with PTA is they take all that and communicate with all those other services to take the design into account. But I can confirm with them tomorrow to see, to make sure that has taken into place.
Mount Laurel is a case in point. There's whole blocks there that can't be accessed by the fire.
Yeah, a number of the previous paths that have been developed have been found to be faulty because there wasn't enough discussion with other providers, but in the last couple of years that process has improved, and I believe all those parties have taken into account.
Sorry, Councillor Humphrey.
I did ask again at the gathering of residents in Broadway, I did ask about the proposed water sensitive design in the verges. Now, the gentleman at that time said there was proposed to be 4, although 4 are not shown in the plan. They only showed 1, which takes up the entire front of one particular residence. I expressed concern at the time that there was nothing in the drawings to show me the depth of that, and he told me they would have to be 30 centimetres below road level. And then I expressed concern that the verges themselves are actually around about 20 centimetres above road level, and they curve upwards in many instances towards the property line. So to my mind, there's an issue there, and I did ask about whether we could get at least some sort of schematic about these depths and widths and what have you, so that we could actually visually understand what was proposed. I am concerned about that, because as a council we have to consider risks. So I would like to see, if it's possible, some sort of idea of the depth of those things and how they would work in those verges. And I don't know if that's possible at this time. The other thing too that our mayor brought up was that there was the ability to perhaps do some plantings in these little island things that are at the beginning of Broadway. I think we identified, was it 4?
I'm not sure of the number, but it was at both ends.
We identified 4, maybe 5 that have plantings. So these prices that are quoted, I'm assuming they don't include that.
No.
Okay.
Just on that, talking to an engineer this afternoon, he's advised me that he's already talked to PTA on the discussions after that, and the PTA said they're happy to develop those into the gardens, to take out the brick paving and allow us to put a garden in there if we want to. The only trouble we currently have, if that happens, is that we don't have a reticulation service going to that area, and we'd have to use it through a water truck process and put it in a process to do that. But it is possible, and they will, if we decide that we want that, they will put it in the final drawings and design that in. At our cost. The garden.
Any more questions on this item?
Oh, I just, Ken, wanted to get some clarity between the two figures, and just to make sure that you had done an analysis based on between $550 and $345, that the $205,000 difference didn't mean that there were substantial changes to what they were doing with the plans. The $200,000 is pretty big.
That was a discussion when we first brought it to council, when we first had a discussion with PTA. That was an estimate price without really going into too much facts of what the whole project was going to be. They estimated it to be $550,000, obviously, from what Gav tells me. $550,000, and then we had the opportunity to put in what budget we wanted to put in. At that stage, we put in $100,000. The actual budget at the time, I think, was that once we go through the process of what they're putting in and how much it's going to cost them, because at that stage they didn't know what the basically the width of the road, the timing, and whether we could put in different types of infrastructure into this road at the time, and that's what they put a price on. So I don't believe it's from PTA's point of view, is saying they are fibbing about the project. They were pretty honest at the start, saying this is totally just an estimate what we think this approach is going to cost, and that's where we're doing to them.
I think PTA just go through a series of gates, and the further they progress the project, the greater the granularity. So about to go through the tender process. Post-tender we'll have a more accurate cost. So I think the level of accuracy is just improved as the time.
I understand, but I feel like we were told we were getting a $550,000 project, and that's why we made a decision to put the amount of $100,000 in, so it would be a $650,000 project. It's now all of a sudden a $445,000 project, which is significantly less, and I feel like if we had been given that information at the time, we might not have committed so much money up front.
Just to correct a little bit there, is that basically the total project they advised us at first was $550,000, and what part would we like to pay into that? And we said $100,000 into the out of the $550,000. It wasn't on top of that, $650,000.
Yeah, thank you.
The actual question is what you mean.
Sorry, yes.
Just a second question I noticed to the first question I noticed, which is when was due to be resurfaced on the asset management plan. Could you itemise the Shackleton Street project, just to provide us with an indicative cost on what the amount of that project was for Medium Street Street Painting and associated works?
That's much on the street.
I'm just interested, I guess, in what it will cost to cut up a bit of the road, put in some soil, put some curbing around it.
I'll give you a break-up of the whole project.
Last question, Councillor
Hammond. Is it not correct that the laws have been changed now so that bicycles can actually go travelling along footpaths now?
That is correct.
Okay. So we've got obviously a footpath on one side of Broadway. So is it not conceivable that that footpath could carry bicycles at least on that side of the road, which would leave a greater width if we only did the bike path on one other side?
The footpath, my understanding, I might be proving correct here, but my understanding is 1.2 metres wide, which is a smaller footpath, and that doesn't encourage people on bikes to use that because it's so small we've got traffic using it, pedestrians and people on mopeds and so forth. So if it had been, if we could, if the council decided to increase the width to a 2 metre path or so for a larger path, it's a possibility that could be an option.
So why do PTA get to do 1.25 in these plans for their width for the bike park, but we have to do 2 metres for a footpath?
Because the footpath is used by multiple users. The footpath, the bike path on the road will be simply footbike paths on the road.
Okay, you happy to move on? Okay, so we might go down to 6.2. I'm just conscious we've got a few staff members here that are specifically wanting to address us on a couple of items. So 6.2 is the waste local law. I believe, Jeff, you were going to give us a briefing on that before there were questions?
Oh, can do.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, Your Worship, I haven't had an opportunity to meet Jeff previously.
Right.
Yes. So, Jeff,
Yes, this is Councillor Ganjel.
Thank you very much. So, what's your role?
Environmental health officer, work under Maria.
Oh, wonderful. So
Second
you're the second one
Yes.
brought on board.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, second one.
Thank you. Now, just the other person I haven't been able to meet yet is the...
Waste officer?
Yes.
Ari?
Yes. Sorry. Thank you. I believe there was going to be waste ferries at Wonderell, but I didn't see any.
Tonight she's
You mean you
located
were?
Outside of me.
Tonight she's located down at the Asheville Soccer Club.
The
doing a
composting workshop?
presentation to residents.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Stand over here.
Yeah, what, I know you were discussing what the plan was before, where did you want to take this on?
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks very much. Okay, so currently the management of waste, and historically it's been done or managed under the Health Act. Since 2007, the state government brought in the Waste Avoidance Resource Recovery Act, which is designed to manage all waste issues. Currently, our health local laws, we have a small number of them that deal with waste. So it's an opportunity to then, there is a requirement that the waste local laws be shown along and brought under the WAR Act. Our existing health local laws do cover some similar things, but the challenges that are facing waste today are a lot more than what they were obviously in 2001. The issues of waste management are far more complex in terms of waste separation and recycling, obviously, to make the best out of those resources. The existing health local laws don't cater or address those sorts of issues. So what we've looked at is there's the Wolga preferred template. We've basically reviewed that template and looking at adopting that one in its entirety with a few minor changes to reflect our local service provisions going forward with the FOGO bin service. So basically, I've brought forward those waste local laws. I hope you've had an opportunity to have a look through those.
So, and you mentioned the model Welga,
Yes.
local law.
Yes.
Other than FOGO specific, are there any other changes that we need to be aware of from that?
Not particularly. These local laws do give us. There's laws in here which will allow us to deal with our current service of verge collections. Currently, we don't have any local laws to deal with and manage the scope of our verge collections. We're making an allowance for that in here, and there's also, if we go down the path of putting bulk skips or bulk receptacles at people's places, these new local laws will also accommodate that, should council choose to go down that, as opposed to putting it out on the verge, or we bring out your dead time thing on your verge.
So just another question I had, there's on page 13 and 14 there is the prescribed offences. I was just wondering if you could give us an indication of what process the staff follow prior to issuing an infringement, and if that's a documented process or something that's just left up to the individual staff.
Well, I'm not exactly sure if there's an enforcement procedure for the Shire as such. However, it's predominantly, or the role is education. but at times you exhaust those. Some people are not predisposed to being educated, let's say, and if you have to deal with issues and because there's complaints about them and whatnot, or it's impacting upon the ability for us to provide an efficient waste management service, then there is the option of issuing enforcement action through infringements. The current health local laws, if people breach those, there is no provision for infringements. It's a matter of going through the courts, which is obviously not an effective use of time. I'm not aware of council having to go to court for previous waste management issues. This will just, having the ability to issue infringements, will just give us that extra flexibility to deal with waste issues on a more efficient basis. But it's a matter of last resort.
Thank you. Councillor Gadgil, do you have a question?
I think Councillor Quinton put her hand up.
Thank you. What exactly does Part 4, Division 2 of the Town of Bassendean Health Local Law 2001 Disposal of Refuse actually say? Please.
This is the bit that was rescinded as part of the process?
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Basically, I will just draw your attention to. Okay. So the existing clauses, I can tell you. The existing clauses relate to definition, disposal of liquid waste and liquid refuse, prescribed area, where it looks at what is the prescribed area that's receiving the bin service, that'll be repealed. Receptacles will be repealed, exemptions, use of receptacles, damage to receptacles and use of other containers. The deposit of refuse, the removal of rubbish or refuse from refuse disposal sites, and the removal of rubbish recyclables from premises or receptacles. They'll all be removed. Basically, the only ones that will remain out of the current waste local laws will be the provisions relating to suitable enclosures, the burning of rubbish or refuse, or the removal of rubbish from building sites. Those ones will be retained temporarily. Some of those clauses will be removed under the Animals, Environment and Nuisance local laws because they will be covered under those local laws. The ones that were being repealed, they're basically being covered under the existing, the draft preferred model that we're looking at adopting. We would be, ultimately, if this local law and the Animals, Environment and Nuisance local laws are adopted, then the remaining health provision would be the suitable enclosure. We'll be looking at keeping that one for the time being until such time as, or anything else that we wish to keep under health local laws or local laws are considered as part of when we're no longer able to keep health local laws. Yeah. So that might be a couple of years away. But we'll
Thank
be doing
you.
that review.
In future, would it be possible to have that information succinctly included? Only because it was very difficult for me to understand something that was being repealed if I wasn't given the information of what was being repealed, and I wasn't going to take the time to go and find that section. So if we're going to include information, could we also have the information to avoid extra questions, please? Thank you.
John, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Worship. I just want to check, so my understanding is the only difference to the WAUGA model is 2.5. Is that what we've included? I'm just trying to, with the FOGO, is that what we've included, the organics waste? Is that?
There's a couple of clauses that we've,
if
I may. We've inserted a definition for bulk waste under 1.5 to suit our purposes, or what works and services considered to be bulk waste.
Yes.
And we've also inserted a definition of what we consider as green waste, which is acceptable to the Shire. Those weren't provided in the Vulgar model. Well, we've also included another definition relating to street setbacks. That comes into play when we look at where people can store their bins from a planning perspective, and that fits in my understanding with the current planning guidelines, is that correct? Yeah. So it would be consistent with planning. And then we've also, if I draw your attention to 2.1.2, we've included that clause, which is separate to or different to the Vulgar preferred model, on the basis that we have a number of multi-residential premises where we may determine the bin numbers that they will receive rather than one bin per household. So it allows us to, say, give them one bin per head or two households. And let's see, if I may, sorry, 2.3b, we've inserted where the receptacle has a capacity of 140 litres.
Okay, yep.
Because that may be an option that will be considered with the Vulgar preferred with the Better Bins program. And also in 2.4 we've inserted the option of the 360 litre recycling bin option.
So, just if I could, just with this, I'm not sure if it comes under this new proposed local law, but the City of Belmont has, in the past year, had an issue where people have illegally dumped building waste and rubble and other items on people's blocks of land. They've been illegally dumped, but the council, the City of Belmont, requires the person who's obviously had the items dumped illegally on their land to pay for the cost of removals.
Yes.
Would that be the same case should that occur in the town of Bassendean?
That sort of issue wouldn't be done.
Without the planning, is it?
No, it'll be done through GESA generally, if it's on someone's verge and whatnot. But ultimately, if it's on someone's property, private property beyond the boundary line, then it becomes unfortunately their responsibility unless they can identify who's actually done the dumping.
Oh, okay. So I've just got one further question. Thank you. Just with the prescribed offences, I'm assuming these are just what WALGA has suggested with penalties?
The penalties, yes.
Yes. Because, for example, I'm just interested to know. So, for example, removing waste without authority from a receptacle provided for the use of the general public in a public place. Now, quite often, unfortunately, the people who do remove items from public bins are people that have no home or shelter, looking for food and the like.
Yes.
So I'm just concerned that these definitions may in fact be penalising those who shouldn't be penalised.
I think when it would come down to some discretion by the officer concerned as to what would be appropriate, the use of that or the application of that provision.
2.2.2.
Depositing waste in a receptacle without consent.
Yes. Would that include where the receptacle has been put out on the verge the night before?
Potentially, yeah. But that's a fairly common practice. You get people who do the night dumping into the neighbours' bins. But potentially where it does become an issue is, for instance, if that bin doesn't then get collected because someone's put in
Too heavy.
Yeah, too heavy or a long appliance, and so the bin doesn't get collected. So there needs to be a mechanism to be able to respond to that if we're able to identify people doing potentially the wrong thing. Because obviously people will be quite aggrieved if their bin's not being picked up because Joe next door is continually putting the wrong things into someone else's bin.
What if Joe's next door neighbour was an elderly gentleman who lived by himself and regularly only filled his bin 1/3 of the way, and occasionally, because Joe's got 4 kids, he has more waste than he can fit into his bin, and if he puts waste into that bin at 10 o'clock at night before it gets collected, he's exposing himself to a 350.
It would be unlikely to be an issue raised with council, but on the basis that the neighbours put the bin out, there's obviously free space there. We would encourage, if it is an ongoing issue, we would encourage obviously the person putting the stuff into the bin to approach their neighbour, ask for their consent. But ultimately I don't see a particular issue unless it's something that which won't certainly be collected. If it's a very large object or something that's bringing it over the weight zone.
Okay. The only other question I had, the definition of green waste, it says here as approved by council. What's the method of approval and what would the instrument be for that approval if it's not in the law?
Typically it'll be approved what's advised in the waste circulars and the information that's going out notifying of the pending collection.
So is that things like the length of the material and the quantity?
Those sorts of things where how it tells you how you need to have it in a certain position, those sorts of things as to what will be accepted. That'll be the mechanism for telling people what's approved and what's not.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, does that mean that every time there's a pickup we have to pass a resolution specifying, or from time to time changing the definition by way of council resolution? I'm just trying to imagine in what way this would be enforceable in court. Ambiguity going against those seeking to enforce it.
I suppose you could prescribe a definition, but then obviously if things were to change as to what we deemed was acceptable and was prescribed, then that would then require an amendment to the local law, and that would be an extensive process, I would imagine. I think the notification by way of the advice slips going out would have been sufficient.
Oh.
Yes or no?
Councillor Brown, did you have a question?
Thank you. I think it was in August last year we had a complaint from a lady in a block of units about people leaving their bins on the verge.
Yes.
And it happens in my street as well. Is there anything in there to discourage people from leaving their bins on the verge?
They get fined.
They get fined.
Well, I think...
They weren't fined.
Well, they
the
can
bins
get
stayed
fined.
empty.
Councillor Brand, I think just, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, this is kind of last resort stuff. It's if there's a big problem that's ongoing that can't be rectified through discussion and education. And
several local councils did try and put in a definition as to what's a reasonable time after collection for things to be collected and removed. Is that sort of your question about how?
An example is in my street we have a group of young blokes living in a house down the road. They don't take the bins at all.
No.
They leave the bins on the street.
Yes.
And when they go out in the morning, they shake their McDonald's or whatever it is and leave them there. And that attracts dogs, crows, and other vermin.
Yes.
They don't take them in. And the lady that complained to the council last year, we had to send a letter out to the residents of that 8 units requesting they bring their bins in, but it wasn't resolved. I think the bins are still out there.
All right. A number of councils, when they've adopted the Walga model, applied looked at putting in a condition in the early stages of when they were bringing in these local laws, was to put in a time frame that needs to be done within a reasonable time and the prescribed time frame. Unfortunately, that was rejected by the Standing Committee on Delegated Authority, as saying that a reasonable time is or you could really look at applying what is a reasonable time. I suppose for most people would think a reasonable time would be within that night. Upon return home, most people tend to think that would be a reasonable period. But unfortunately, several councils did try putting in that in a specific time frame. They should be within removed from the verge drive, but they were unfortunately rejected.
Thanks very much.
Councillor Quinton, did you have a question?
Just wanted to ask, what is the normal process that we've been going through to put out a draft new law? And has it always just been the draft new law, or have we explained what the differences are?
So I think with this particular one, it's really important to articulate it in the broader context of the waste strategy. And what we're talking about here is at the enforcement end. Obviously, most of our focus will be at the front end in terms of education and awareness. We hope to see very few people down this end if we get the education and the awareness right as part of the new waste strategy. So that's where this sits. And I think when we put it out for consultation, we need to explain it in that broader context.
Thank you.
Another question?
Thank you, Your Worship. I do. So in contrast to our approach with green waste, where we've sought to say that it will be defined by some unspecified method at some point in time, we have been very specific with our definition on recycling waste here. Recently there was a change in what was considered acceptable recycling waste.
Yes.
If that were to happen again, would we not have to go through the whole process of amending our local law?
Can you re-ask that question? What did
Well, it also says down the bottom, any other waste determined by the local government to be recycling waste.
Yeah. Number G there, letter G.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we regulate, sorry, just
Yeah, if you may.
don't mean to.
No, please. Yeah.
So we regularly put out publications to our residents. So of course there's the social media public information that we put out. There's the Bulga put out information, but there also the town of Bassendean and the MRC put out publications on a annual basis, that's delivered to each of our residents. So it kind of it explains what's an A to Z list of what can be recycled and what's not recyclable. But as the CEO has mentioned, this is the back end. We don't intend, we're hoping that we wouldn't ever get to that point, because we'll go through an education process with our residents. If we're having a problem, we'll speak to the resident, we'll explain to them what the situation is, so that we can try and avoid getting to this point. The other, for example, in recent months we've had issues with one resident who was dropped an engine block into our bin, or into his neighbour's bin or something, I think, and so it caused us problems in regards to, number one, it was too heavy, it couldn't get lifted, his neighbour didn't get his bin picked up. We've spoken to him previously about, please don't use your neighbour's bin for the disposal of items, because it's impacting your neighbour and his waste isn't getting picked up. But he continued to do it. If we had this mechanism, we can say, if you continue to do that, this is the consequence. At the moment, we don't have a consequence. It's just, please don't do it.
Yes, thank you. If, for example, so with the recycling waste definition that we've got here in the local law, if that were to change due to China changing its specifications on importing waste, or a change in the contract, or something that the state government would do, does that mean that we would then have to go through the process of amending the local law? Because we've specified the definition of what recycling waste means quite specifically.
I imagine if we wanted to do enforcement action, we would have to look at having first amended the local law. I would think that would be fairly low.
So, but do you see what I'm grappling with here? That on one hand, we've said that green waste is something to be decided at some point somewhere through some unspecified method, but on the other hand, we've said here that recycling waste is specific to these items.
Yeah, we can look at amending that to something more broad, means any material as approved by local government.
Yes. Now, this will ultimately go to the delegated legislation committee of the Legislative Council in the State Parliament, and they will look at it as to its enforceability. Have we got any guidance on these words having previously been approved?
These have been approved by the delegated authority.
Have they been tested in court?
Just picking up on your point, you're quite correct. It's under the recycling definition, it's got it's got examples of what they are. But item G of that list, it does have any other items determined by the local government to be recycling waste.
Yep.
So it does provide council with that flexibility.
Yeah.
I think he's suggesting that if paper was no longer recyclable,
Yes.
that's where you're coming from. Is that correct?
Yes. We would have to go through the process of amending. And just one final question. So with the glass containers, as I understand it, our contract requires that they be cleaned glass containers. Is that the case?
Yes, there's publications that are currently out recommending that people should clean the glasses.
Okay.
And
It's not just glass that needs to be cleaned though, it's
plastic
yeah.
bottles and all types of things. Yes, so it's from a hygiene perspective to ensure that the bins are being well maintained.
Well, and also, as I understand it, from the perspective that if the waste is going to end up in China, they will accept it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So should we, has any thought been given to specifying the way in which materials are presented for recycling in the draft?
So in the event that someone's putting the right materials in their bin, yet they're contaminated because they've still got food products and so on in them.
But are we going to take someone to court because they didn't wash out their tomato tin?
Well, no, but our education officer, for example, would not be able to say it'd be really grouse if you would wash these and put them in, because they would look at the law and say, well, that's not required and you can't legally enforce it, so no, I'm not going to.
Grey area.
The majority of residents do try and do willing to do the right thing.
Yes, but we're making a law here, and so laws need to be specifically enforceable. I'm trying to impress upon people.
Thank you, Your Worship. That brings me to a question then. So our bin ferries that we now have at our events, supposedly. So with drink containers, obviously at events, they're not washed out. So does that mean all that is actually just general pollution waste at our events?
No, that could be recycled.
But if they need to be cleaned, as was just explained, how would they be recyclable if they're not cleaned and scrubbed and stuff?
If you left half of your Coke in your bottle and put it in the bin, that would then be a problem for the recycling, wouldn't it? Because
It would be.
But would it contaminate the whole bunch? That's what I'm asking.
If you've got residue, if you're looking at most containers that go in the bin would be have residue. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those items, my experience of looking at being in waste management for 3 years at Donnybrook, those materials get recycled.
Oh, okay. So you can. There is an element of.
Yeah. The problem with, say, if you've got a half a bottle of 2 litre bottle, and it's half full or not, it basically doesn't get recycled. The machines pick that and sort it, and it goes into landfill.
So what about like beer bottles, for example? They have like the residue of beer at the bottom of it. Is that the same as?
Basically, all your glass products, they're crushed. The first stage, they get crushed, and then they go into road base.
Yep.
Because there's no market for.
So, thank you. I've just got one last question. One last question because I just love saying it. Let me have a look. Oh, here we are. Failing to notify of a lost, stolen, damaged, or defective receptacle, or whatever.
Bin.
Receptacle. Bin. That's right. That's what it should be. Plain, simple, easy language. Whatever happened to that? Yes. $50. In what instance would that be enforced?
I would think that if it was a damaged bin, they haven't notified us. The bin's at someone's property, let's say they're not putting it out, it's providing access for permit.
Oh, okay.
The
Thank you.
option should be that they would then.
Yes. Thank you.
Should have informed us.
Yep.
Okay. Last question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Did you have one as well, Councillor?
No.
Yeah, Councillor Bell.
Just following on from my previous, within standing orders, we stand.
We're not understanding honest, but if you wish to stand.
No, John does. I just thought I might be missing something.
I love formality.
Just following on from my other query, would we, and it has been recognised as a problem by me, by other councils, been put in a too hard basket. It's a problem now, it could be an increasing problem. Yes. Would it be, under the duties of owner or occupier, would it be, we consider including a sub-clause D that would be remove the empty bins from towns, empty bins from the road verge to within the property line within a reasonable time. When reasonable is reasonable. It's out there between bin collections,
Yes,
it stays there for a month.
Which clause are you referring to?
2.7 D. Would we consider putting in a sub-clause D? It just don't make sense. If we're going to educate people, we've got to have something, a reference point.
Well, point A covers that, isn't it?
Yeah, 2.7A looks at keeping each receptacle in an approved storage compound or screen from public view and located outside the street back, except for a reasonable period before and after collection.
Say again?
Clause A of 2.7 looks at the reasonable period before and after collection, and the bin should be basically behind the.
Does that satisfy you?
It does.
Street setback line. Yeah.
Thank you.
Last one.
Question perhaps for Christian. So the model or draft law here refers to a setback that's defined in a policy. Is that policy likely to change during the life of this, or is this something that we can change under our planning schemes? Is it something that we've got discretion over?
Through the chair, the local law does cross-refer to the R codes. The R codes are a statement of planning policy through the Western Australian Planning Commission. The R codes are varied from time to time, and street setbacks on occasion are adjusted.
Would it then not be possible, instead of referencing the specific policy, just make it more general, like the relevant state government policy or something like that, to avoid the situation that Councillor Wilson's referring to?
One possible alternative is to reference the building line, the line of where the building on that particular site sits, rather than the setback line as defined by the R codes. And then that is dictated to by wherever the building is positioned on that block.
So what about our town planning scheme? Do we have something in the town planning scheme that defines building lines?
No, that is a matter that is entirely covered by the R codes.
What if we have form-based planning?
In terms of what may happen under the upcoming versions of the R codes, including the apartment code that was released yesterday, under what's either in the version that was released yesterday or what might happen to the section of the R codes to cover the group dwelling and single house provisions, unknown with respect to each.
Okay, let's move on to 6.4, which is Jeff's again. This is, 6.3, which is the Animals, Environmental Nuisance and Pests Local Law. Thank you, Ken. So I think you can expect a few questions on this one as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. The purpose for these local laws, or the review of the local laws, are twofold. One is as mentioned earlier, the Public Health Act was recently been adopted in 2016, and there's a 5-year rollout phase or transition phase with the new Public Health Act. Currently, our health local laws are under the Health Miscellaneous Provisions Act of 1911, were made under that law. But with the new Public Health Act, there will no longer be an ability for local councils to have health local laws. Meaning, if councils wish to have laws regulating those sort of matters, they will need to look at producing them under the Local Government Act. So that's really the main purpose of the review, is to shift these things across to the Local Government Act now, so that we are ready when the Public Health Act is fully adopted. Further, one of the other benefits of bringing these local laws in under the Local Government Act is that it will enable authorised officers to deal with breaches in a more efficient manner by issuing modified penalties where appropriate, again after appropriate education has been applied. Currently, where breaches under our health local laws, the only mechanism that's available is, for instance, if you were to have a rooster and people weren't getting rid of the rooster, is through the courts, which is obviously very inefficient, and it's been a process that hasn't been utilised, to my knowledge, by councils. The maximum penalty is typically $1,000 under the health local laws that we've currently got. First offence is typically 10% through the courts. So obviously the penalties that would be handed out by the courts would be a cost-effective mechanism. So having these local laws under the Local Government Act will give us the ability to deal with breaches more effectively. And also with those sort of things in place, those two reasons for bringing it in, is also it gave us the opportunity to do a review of our existing health local laws to make sure they're still contemporary. There's a requirement under believe following local laws will be reviewed every 8 years. The current local laws in 2001, so it was well overdue.
Do you have a question, Councillor Clinton?
Can I just say how much I'm enjoying the preamble before we ask questions? Can we have more of this, please? Because it rules out a whole lot of questions. I do have one question, then I'm going to hand over to Councillor Wilson, who I understand has a million questions. But I was just wondering about the chickens and dropping the number from 20 to 12. And if there's going to be a phase-in period so that overnight we're not having people having to slaughter 8 chickens or more. What is
the requirement for keeping? Currently, you're allowed to keep up to 20 without council or approval of Shire. So the proposal is to have 12, to bring it down to 12 to make it consistent with other local councils. I believe we've issued 2 approvals for people to keep more than 20 chickens. I don't think that there will be a great number of people keeping that sort of number on blocks these days. Who have actually sought approval to keep 20 or would have up to 20 chickens or more than 20 chickens. Most people on a block these days would probably half a dozen chickens will generally be enough to provide them with eggs and whatnot.
But if somebody had 20 chickens, there'd be no expectation that they would be immediately required to go down to 12 chickens.
No, Carl. No culling. And no putting the chickens in the Fogo bin.
but that would be a breach of the law, though.
They would be.
Yeah.
So
potentially, we would be typically what we would do is say given a time frame that they would need to look at reducing them or rehoming those chickens if they come to our attention as a result of a complaint.
But surely they could actually apply to have 20 chickens if they want to retain their 20 chickens.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's just a barrier. A threshold where they need to then apply.
Is there a cost for these existing people to apply for any?
No, it's just a letter with the description as to how they keep the chickens in order to prevent nuisance to neighbours. So on those, they would generally just provide us with how many chickens they wish to keep and provide us with a site plan as to where the block is, so we can determine the distance to neighbours.
And to prevent chicken overcrowding.
And
to prevent chicken overcrowding.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they need to have although animal welfare is not really a concern of councils, obviously we would look at, that they're not operating a commercial chicken enclosure, commercial chicken yard.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Worship. What's the science behind the 5 metres as opposed to the 9 metres, or is this a number that's just been?
It's just a number that's that's right. I don't think there's any science based on the 9 metres. That's hard and fast, but based on an experience of one it's bringing into consistency with other local councils, but just based on 9 metres has been proven to be an effective distance to ameliorate or attenuate odour issues if they're managed sufficiently. If they're less than 9 metres potentially from their neighbour, people are far more likely to be aggrieved by my experience, either noise, flies, smell.
Are you aware whether any other local governments have attempted to reduce those distances?
No, not. I was aware of this, obviously, perhaps it was your specialty or interest in reducing the buffer, and we're trying to accommodate that by reducing the buffer to the people who have the chickens, because if they're going to be impacted by the nuisance, it's not so much of a concern to ourselves. Our concern principally is to nuisance being impacted on the neighbours and their quiet enjoyment of their property. So that's why we wish to retain at 9 metres. But we do believe that minimum threshold should be in place, because there are issues around potentially health impacts from living in close proximity to birds with avian influenza and those sorts of things.
So does the WA Health Department?
They don't regulate chickens.
No, they don't have any guidance or guidelines or suggested.
No, Department of Agriculture's got a few guidelines, but it's about the animal welfare and management rather than the health issues. The Department of Health has always left it up to local councils to determine their health local laws and how they deal with poultry.
So it says here too that the chicken enclosure would have to be 1.2 metres, is it, or
1.2 metres from the boundary?
From the boundary?
Yes.
Yeah, what's the thinking behind that?
The keeping of chickens too close to the boundary, some of the issues that have occurred where we've gone out to properties where they've had the enclosure as part of the boundary as part of the enclosure, is people hosing the chicken enclosures out, water going in through and seeping under or through the fence and under the fence, and bringing with it obviously the smells, manures. Also, having it off the boundary, people are less likely to be building, adding fixtures to the fence line, which is obviously an issue from a building perspective. But chickens have, if it's just the fence, chickens will tend to also wish to dig around the fence line. So depending on the type of your fence that we have these days, a lot of them are and they will be increasingly moving towards the colour-blind type fences, as the hardy type fences will become. They're no longer producing those as of March next year.
What if it's a brick wall?
Brick wall, I suppose we could look at applying discretion. It would depend on, I would think, the view of the neighbour. Yeah, we would take that into consideration.
But that's not captured in the draft act, though.
No. But discretion is often applied when how you enforce legislation. It's always been applied.
Yes, but the discretion is applied whether or not to enforce carefully before our legislation, although it's not to legislate through discretion.
So what's the question?
So presumably, just following your example about discretion, that it would be up to an individual inspector to decide whether the type of fence was acceptable.
Depending on if there's a complaint, we will go out and assess it. And if the complaint relates to the chickens being up against the fence, in case of brick fence, and it's a genuine issue, then we will insist on the 1.2 metre buffer.
So, Christian, people are allowed to build houses on property boundaries, are they not? Parapet walls, sheds, all manner of things are allowed to be built on property boundaries?
In many, but not all cases, there are as of right entitlements to build portions of buildings to the boundary with a zero setback these days, yes.
Yes. But presumably not if this law would go through as is not a chicken enclosure. So yes, you have a right to build, say, a shed or a part of a house on a property boundary, but not a chicken enclosure. Is that what's being proposed here?
Yeah,
Well, I don't think they don't really constitute a building. If you're referring to a shed, then I'm sure the council has policies on setbacks for sheds to fences from a storm.
I'm inviting people to consider the contrasting approach here, that you could put a shed on a property boundary without your neighbour having a view about it.
Well, I'm not exactly sure that's the case for a fence. I'm not a building surveyor, but I always thought there was a requirement for sheds to be set back off the boundary from a right.
There are certain circumstances where various types of building structures can be built to the boundary with a zero setback.
On a shed. Yeah.
The deemed to comply provisions that apply to sheds at the moment, one of the criteria that needs to be satisfied is actually the compliance with the prescribed side setback. So a 1 metre side setback is the as of right entitlement. Discretion does exist to allow a zero setback, but that is upon application. That's not the automatic as of right entitlement, but can certainly be approved.
So if the fence was not permeable and couldn't be dug under because it was either sheets that went into the ground or a brick fence with a footing, you wouldn't imagine that there would be any problems then with having the chickens against that fence?
Provided it's well managed, how they look after the chickens, there's no odour coming through, they're not hosing down, and vermin's not an issue, then I would not see that as particularly an issue.
Obviously I'm imagining where you're coming from is that we're wanting to promote better waste practices. One of the ways to do that is to have chickens in your backyard. A lot of people have small properties these days, so how can we best facilitate that? Is that correct?
Yes. That's part of it.
That's part of it. Is it worth, like this week between now and the meeting, like the two of you sitting down to talk about some of these things to see if there are some other solutions other than what's been proposed in this section.
But then, so if it was a colour-blind fence though, and they're typically above the ground,
there's more likely to be an issue, isn't there?
Yes. Foxes could dig under it, presumably as well.
I'm sure the chickens would be very distressed.
What about a wooden fence that could get termites? What do we have there for termites?
But it would be open to us then to define a set of circumstances in which it would be okay to have chickens up against the property boundary.
Yeah, I would think so. But that could be obviously quite wordy and maybe somewhat difficult to put into legislation.
But it would provide certainty though for the person reading it rather than having to guess what was in the head of the person applying the
Perhaps, perhaps a policy or a guideline might be a council guideline for keeping chickens might be the more appropriate.
Does anyone else have any questions on the side? Councillor Angel?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Look, just a little bit concerned with, notice this one and now, because previously we've taken people to court should we wish to prosecute and the like up until this point in time. I'm just noticing now everything has a prescribed penalty for, blinking too many times potentially as well. I noticed with this one we've got the modified penalty first offence, then the subsequent offence, which is obviously tiered up. I'm just wondering if there's need to have both tiers within the penalties. My concern is we're potentially going from bin ferries to infringement ferries with everything that people can be infringed for with these two items.
The way it currently stands is through the existing laws is you would do a prosecution first offence and then again second offence the magistrate would escalate the penalty. So I suppose that's where you've got the increasing penalty on the modified penalty.
Yeah, but what I suppose the point that I'm making currently, it has to be quite a serious action that prompts the town to actually then take it to enforcement level. Whereas with this, literally in a blink of an eye, you can whack out fines willy-nilly.
I don't think we'll be issuing fines willy-nilly at all. And it's not been the practice of the past.
Well, because we've had this in the past.
No, in terms of issuing enforcement options, certainly with infringements for noise, we've been able to issue infringements for noise for many years, since 1997, and it's not something that we go about issuing them willy-nilly. We go about them in accordance with the council's view of education, and then as a last resort, you would look at enforcement action. But predominantly, the vast majority of complaints that we deal with under the health nuisances and the like are all dealt with through letters and education. Very small percentage, less than 1%, would be dealt with through infringements currently.
I don't think, well, I hope Councillor Gantry didn't mean to imply that you were going to do it willy-nilly, because I know that you take your job very seriously and that it's the last resort. So, Councillor Quinton?
2.7, Section C. Other caged birds. Is that canaries and budgerigars and finches and it's very broad?
Yes. Yep.
You're not allowed to keep budgie? We're not allowed to have budgies now?
No, you can.
Oh, sorry. Sorry?
In the numbers, you can have up to.
So that section.
12.
Is that section offset by anything else to stipulate that you can keep budgies and all those kinds of things in the law?
Limitations on keeping of poultries and caged birds. Let me see if I may. Excuse me.
Subsection 3.
Yep, the council can, 2.7, sub-clause 3, the local government can approve larger numbers
Well, we've written approval, so everyone's going to write to us if they want to keep a budgie.
No, above the prescribed numbers.
Yeah, above the prescribed numbers of 12.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. And so we obviously don't have anyone with 12 peafowl or 12 turkey or 12 geese at the moment. that we know of?
Not that, that are not.
Okay.
Not that are problematic.
Yeah, that's right.
Councillor Gandy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to go back to the penalties again.
Yes.
I just noticed, I'm just looking through this, I don't think there's any mention in Division 2, offences and penalties, that talks about education as a first method prior to prescribing an infringement. If you could just draw me to where the education is our preferred method.
It wouldn't be education and how council enforces. The approach it takes to the enforcement of regulations wouldn't be in an act or the regulations. That would be covered by. It's generally you would have an enforcement policy. I'm not aware of if we have an enforcement policy, but it's been the approach of this council, as far as I'm aware, is to go through, and with other councils, is to go through the education process. I think that sort of question, good question, should perhaps come under a council enforcement policy.
Can I then ask, do we have a council enforcement policy?
Through the chair, that's actually an active project that we're working on right at the moment.
Yeah.
So no, at this point in time we don't, but we are looking at preparing one of those.
Because yes, obviously my point is that with penalties being so prescriptive as they are on pages, oh, they don't have pages on this one. Oh, they don't.
Schedule 1.
Yes, Schedule 1. I'll see. Whilst this current council may have an ideology of education first, there is always shifts in councils and what have you, and my concern is that future councils might potentially have a enforcement preference rather than an education preference. So I just want to make sure that if certainly when we're looking at such prescriptive penalties, and my apologies I offended by saying willy-nilly, prescriptive penalties for our policies, I would just like to make sure that we have it bedded in that education is our first preference.
Mr. Buckle is nodding at us over there, so I think
Wonderful.
It's been clearly communicated tonight
Thank
that
you.
that is the preference.
Yes.
Any further questions on this one? Just before you continue, is anybody else that has a question on this item? Last one, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Take people to 2.8 E for Edward.
2.8 what?
E for Edward. It talks about the enclosure having an unobstructed area of at least 20 square metres. I'm not sure I understand fully what's being described here.
That's currently what we have in place at the moment. We're looking at continuing with that in the new local laws. So they have a 20-metre, yes, they 5 by 4, and within that you can have UWA animal enclosure with a roof at night, and that's generally I think it's 300 by 300 is how we put in the area for that.
So would that be the same if you had 1 chicken or 12 chickens?
No. Obviously you wouldn't need such a big enclosure for where they're going to be roosting. They're going to be having, but there is a reasonable expectation that birds are provided adequate space to do what birds do, poultry do. And I think 20 metres from an animal welfare perspective would be an appropriate area.
So am I correct in understanding that the current definition for free range is 1 square metre per chicken?
One per, well yeah, they're basically unfortunately. Yeah.
So chickens are social creatures.
Yes.
They like company.
They do. Up to I think about 12 birds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But would it be open to us to instead think of a ratio of area per bird so that it created some flexibility? There are many houses in Bassendean that don't have 20 square metres of backyard at all.
Yeah.
And if somebody had a small strip of yard, perhaps 1.5 metres from the house to the property boundary, they wanted to keep 2 birds, could we come up with a formula perhaps that would...
I think it would be very difficult to put something like that into regulation. If you're saying, if you're thinking one square metre would be appropriate.
Well, that's the current definition for free range is 1 square metre per bird. So
it is, yeah.
But,
Councillor Wilson, can I suggest that you have a conversation with Jeff around this to try and come to some understanding of what is possible, because I know that this is really important to you, and I flagged it with Jeff earlier that this was something that we wanted to discuss. But
well, certainly we've tried to accommodate that.
yes, and I've held off on all of my questions about this matter for 6 months on the understanding that this conversation would come up at some point. So I'm happy to have a discussion offline, but then that would prevent everyone else from being privy to that discussion.
I love my chicken best in a roll as well.
So you're saying you have further questions you want to ask now?
No, I'm picking up what you're putting down, Your Worship. I'm fine to move on.
I'm looking forward to your foreshadowed amendments.
Rewritten that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Jeff.
Okay,
You've been very thorough, Jeff. Thank you very much.
The proposed amendment 11th local planning scheme. So Alex, that's your item. Was there anything that you wanted to speak to prior to councillors asking questions?
Oh, no preamble. Yeah.
Did we do 6.1?
Yes.
Yes, but we're going back to 6.1. We're just doing the ones where we've got start
No,
present
that's fine.
specifically for these items.
Yep.
Oh, I thought we had a whole lot of questions. We did do 6.1. Oh no, sorry.
No, we haven't done 6.1.
No, sorry, 6. I was just looking at 6 thinking it was 6.1. Yes,
So we'll
my
go back to
apologies.
that after we've
Yep.
addressed
Okay.
these ones.
Yep.
So 6.4.
No questions?
Right, hang on.
Thank you, Alex. You've got off the hook very
So you've got no prescribed penalties in this one.
They know a lot about chicken. There's always a silver lining.
Okay, thank you. 6.10 now, which is the draft policy for the CEO's annual performance review. So that is Mary and Rhonda, I believe.
Bye, Alex.
See you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll provide a preamble for you for this one. So the annual performance review policy is a new policy. Council currently doesn't have this policy in place. With the new CEO Peter starting on board, so this is an opportunity for Council to consider a policy to guide the process and provide a system and transparency around this process. What's included in the policy for your information is that there would be a review panel which would consist of the Mayor and 2 councillors elected by Council to conduct the review, and also an independent facilitator to assist in that process as well. Some of the text is also taken from the current CEO contract, so it is aligned to the requirements in the contract as well. The policy has been taken from some other council policies, but also amended to suit the requirements of what I thought would be suitable for this council, and also aligned to the CEO contract. So there are quite a few councils that currently have this type of policy in place.
Thank you. Councillor Ganju.
Yes, thank you, Worship. We are a small council here. I mean, we don't have 15, 11 councillors. I suppose I'm probably speaking more in debate. I'll phrase it as a question. I'm just wondering why, considering the size of the council that we are, why all councillors can't be involved in the process, as has been the place for quite a number of years at this council.
I'm not sure that this policy is suggesting all councils wouldn't be involved in the process.
Well, it says 3.
No, that's just for the panel.
What is the, sorry, just explain to me what the panel is separate to the process.
Yes, sure. So the panel would initially work together with an independent facilitator to, draft or come up with some of those KPIs around the CEO performance, and then it would actually also be considered by council as a whole for that feedback as well. So
After they've already been drafted up for council to look at.
As initial I guess,
As a
concepts.
starting point.
Yes, yeah.
That's the process. Anyway.
So, in putting together this body of work, did you have a look at the EMRC's approach to their CEO?
No, I didn't actually. No.
What do they have that you liked particularly?
There's a lot of wording around the process of doing the evaluation that had already been done that I thought might be useful to have a look at, but without comparing the two documents side by side, I'm not sure if there's anything specific that's missing.
Yes, just a question then. Would the consultant then be conducting sessions with whole of council or just the 3 councils?
So initially it was proposed that the facilitator would conduct with those 3 councillors, but then also participate that with all councillors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand this is just a policy and not legislation. So the 2 councillors that would be on the panel wouldn't be subject to the Local Government Act. So I'm just wondering how you are going to prove, not because of us, but because of future panels, and someone might just not like someone. How are you going to prove that the councillor has the ability to be fair and objective?
Yeah, I understand. And that has actually been considered as part of the policy in terms of, if you look under review panel, it does actually talk about the councillors that are participating in the process, and it's sort of dot pointed there about what that would mean. So it talks about some of those responsibilities that councillors would need to adhere to in terms of when they're reviewing the agreement. Yeah.
Okay.
Ultimately, it would still be a decision of the whole council.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, but the whole council would be working off the advice of the panel.
Yes.
So what if during that process it's found that councillor isn't able to be measured and unbiased in the decision making? What happens then?
I think when it goes to council, that's obviously something that needs to be considered as a group. So you would have the panel that would be working together to, I guess, initiate some of those performance agreements and assessing that, and then it would be up to the council to then discuss it as a whole group and make sure that there is, transparency, and that review panel have, I guess, provided feedback that is of the same view of all council, that it's not just one biased view.
It had just flagged as well that if there was a consultant involved, they would provide an independent report in addition.
Yeah, yes, correct, yes.
Then why would we have a panel if we've got an independent report happening? I see what I'm getting at here. There's a different process between recruiting a CEO, because none of us have met the CEO before. But now that we as councillors and future councils will have worked with the CEO, and someone might just not like them.
Yeah.
It becomes very subjective, and I just feel like it would be better, because we are such a small council, that we all are involved in it rather than just 2 people, because I don't know how you're going to police someone who has some kind of vexatious nature against the CEO.
Yes, yeah. I
Or
appreciate
otherwise.
those comments.
Or they love them to death. Who knows?
Yes, yeah. And look, that's certainly a decision by council that you can include that in the policy, that it is a panel which includes all, well, it's not a panel, I guess, but it includes all councillors in terms of making that assessment, working with that facilitator to do that. So that's certainly a decision that council can make in the policy. Yeah.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Worship. Walga has a course on CEO performance review, so I was just wondering if any thought was given to maybe making a successful completion of that course a requirement for council.
Yeah,
I had the same point.
Yeah, we can definitely include that, yes.
I think this is also one of the sections that will be addressed through the first stage of local government amendments. I think it's acknowledged it's an area of weakness that needs further strengthening. In terms of, I'm talking about myself, I guess the protections of the CEO, because you're right, it can be a vulnerable position, and just even when you get a good performance report.
Oh, you haven't told her what's happening next week.
I guess one of the other safeguards is in appointing people to that panel, if that would also be a decision of council. So if there was a person who was problematic and council still chose to appoint them, that would assume that that means that that person reflects the views of a significant number of councillors.
Yes.
But any other questions? Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Rhonda. Okay, so I think we're now back to 6.1, the call for notices of motion from the National General Assembly.
So I don't mind talking on this one.
See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
Jeff.
night.
Thanks,
Have a good
Renee and Rhonda. So this is an opportunity, I guess, for the town of Bassendean to put forward a position via our mayor, looking at item 6.1. And I guess having worked in state government for a long time and now working in the local government sector, I think there's a real opportunity here to have a discussion, at least raise awareness around the improved allocation and use of public monies to achieve shared outcomes. And I thought this might be something that we could just present a paper on to raise level of awareness. And I think one of the earlier discussions we had tonight sort of highlights that point around this community developing a really strong vision and then ensuring that tiers of government align their expenditure to that vision rather than the reverse. So it's a conversation that I think needs to be had, and I thought it was an opportunity to develop a paper and potentially Renee present if we get... Yes, in Canberra.
I just had a question around the National General Assembly being obviously a countrywide forum as opposed to a state-based forum, because we're specifically talking in our case about interactions with our state government and the rationale for where we would target this conversation.
And I actually think this is about the tiers of government, the 3 tiers of government, and we just have to look at local communities all over, and we have federal funding, state funding, and obviously local government's trying to achieve its local vision for its community. And I think it's about whether we're talking ratepayers or taxpayers, it is public money, and it's about sharpening the focus and achieving what that local community is seeking in a more sort of planned, holistic way rather than money. And I think we've seen examples of dysfunctional communities, particularly in some of our regional centres where we've had lots of money going in and a few outcomes to show.
Also, if there was a national stage, it might be an opportunity for us to raise the issue of packaging standards, national packaging standards. If we're dealing with the back end of packaging, maybe it would be nice if the Commonwealth Government was to use the corporation's power perhaps to require that all packaging be either 100% compostable or recoverable.
There is, or can I just make that point? Frydenberg has made that announcement, but not until 2025. So he's
committed to not doing anything.
Interestingly,
for 6 years.
He also supports waste to energy plants.
Yes, that's what I've got.
So it's in his interest to continue to create waste.
Yes. So
that it can be shipped to a waste to energy plant. Yes. So the other idea I had was about no more waste to energy plants. We just.
Or stop pretending that they're renewable energy.
Yeah.
Because burning plastic made out of fossil fuel is not renewable energy, but it's 50% renewable according to the Commonwealth Government.
I also had written down stuff because it was mid last year when the federal government announced that, and you're correct, they've got reusable, combustible or recyclable by 2025, but they've only got certain percentages of the packaging that are that. So I was thinking that perhaps we could look at this and see if we can put a proposal forward that the percentage be completely recyclable or what have you. There are some other things in there. The ban on single-use plastic items, I think, is 2025. I was looking at perhaps we could request that come to 2020, so pull it closer, because single-use plastic is, the ban on that's being adopted right across the state, so I don't see any reason to delay. There's also the new Australasian recycling label must be displayed prominently on packaging from, I think they've got 2025, but it's unclear whether that would apply to imports as well. So there's quite a few things in that announcement that leave a lot to be desired, and my curiosity is whether we can put forward a proposal that is perhaps a little bit more tight, and the obvious aim is to reduce the amount of waste that is produced.
Before we just keep throwing ideas out, is that what we're doing now?
Well, can we do two motions? First question is, can we put forward two different things? Because I quite like to see
why not.
Yeah. And what's the format? Is it like the Walker State Conference where, and it's representative? So how many people is it a representation? Because there's a lot more local governments in New South Wales, so we're going to be outvoted.
No, there's a lot more governments in WA, I would have thought.
Really?
Yeah, because they've done the amalgamation thing. So
we've got 150.
What, New South Wales?
No, in WA.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's a question to ask. And so it's a voting, majority vote on it across the nation. Is that the format?
So I understand what happens looking at the website is that often what happens, action is allocated to the relevant federal minister to progress. So it could be that, if we're talking about funding, it might end up with Treasury. If we're talking waste, it might end up with environment. So essentially it's up to them,
if supported by the group present,
to respond. Yeah.
So can I ask another question? From a time point of view, if this council wanted to put forward two different proposals as we've suggested, because I quite like yours, I think that's excellent. Do we have adequate time to put all that forward or not? Because if it's too difficult, then we, as councils, we need to know and concentrate our efforts. So
certainly. Well, I'm comfortable taking the lead on the tiers of government and funding and greater collaboration. I guess in the waste space, it's probably one where I'd look for somebody else to take the lead, but there is a bit of work there that needs to happen around research.
And that potentially Welga and Rebecca Brown could assist us with?
Certainly. I think it's just being clear about our position and whether it would be a position that would come from Welga or the town of Bassendean.
Okay. So we don't have to take it up through the Welga process in order for it to go to national conference?
Not necessarily. So we could be the lead and ask them to contribute to it, and obviously recognise their contribution. Yeah.
We do aim to display leadership in environmental sustainability. So that is a core objective.
John, did you have a question?
Yes. Just really the process, Your Worship. So prior to anything actually being put up and submitted from the town, will the wording come back to council for ratification? Because I'm hearing a lot of things being thrown around. There has to be one dissenting voice potentially in the room, and that may well be me or may well not be me. But yeah, just want to make sure of the process, because I think infrastructure is a very important thing for communities as well, not simply just waste.
It's definitely like the CEO's suggestion.
No, definitely.
Okay, Okay, is everyone happy with this one?
Happy days.
Okay, 6.5, this is a request to the Minister of the Lands to dedicate the laneway between Guildford Road and Kenny Street, Campaign Streets as a public road. Can I ask a really simple question to start with? Is the definition of a right of way that it is in private ownership?
I may have to take that on
Sorry.
notice.
What makes me feel better that I had to ask the question?
I believe it's owned by a company that doesn't exist.
No, I'm not talking about this particular one. I'm talking about like when we're looking at the rights of way throughout the whole town as per point 2 in the officer recommendation, whether they're all private or... if we were to acquire rights of way, is there a cost to the town to purchase it from the owner? Well, in this case it's the deceased estate, but in other cases if they were privately owned, and we're talking about looking at how we can acquire those public roads in the future. I'm just...
As far as I recall, we have a register of all the right-of-ways in the town, and as far as I recall, when I looked at that register, all of them are deceased estates from a number of years ago,
Right.
and so there is no owner, as far as I know. But that was,
estate, yeah.
but that I must admit that was probably maybe a year or two since I looked at that register.
But section 52 says the minister would acquire the land, so that would be compulsory acquisition by the Crown.
So there'd be no...
That would be the first part of the process, right? The Crown would acquire the land and then invest it.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. I don't think there is a cost, but perhaps I will just provide that clarification prior to the council meeting.
And in doing so, could you clarify that it would be a compulsory acquisition process?
And so my other question was just about the benefit of the town acquiring the land. Obviously there'd be some maintenance implications and so on, but it seems like there are significant benefits as well. Are you able to articulate them for us?
Thank you. I guess the main benefits, well, in this case, obviously it provides the access entitlements to people on both sides of the right-of-way, which doesn't currently exist. But it also gives the town the opportunity to regulate and control what can happen within the right-of-way with respect to parking restrictions and the like.
So when they can't legally access at the moment, does that impact on the development applications, and if they're having vehicular access from the rear of their property and so on, or how does that work?
Thank you. So if people are proposing parking structures from the right-of-way at the present time, one of the R code requirements for us to be able to approve is that there has to be demonstrated legal rights of access to that laneway.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
No, it's okay.
No.
Rick and John, the office door.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I don't know if this has been explained, but how did we get in this position in the first place? And how do we avoid being in this position in the future?
Thank you. In most cases, when a subdivision is undertaken, both sides of the right-of-way, the lots are shown on the same plan of subdivision as the right-of-way, so the entire street block is created as part of the subdivision. In this instance, what happened was that only the lots on one side of the right-of-way were created on the same plan of subdivision as the right-of-way going back 100 years ago or so. So they're the properties of the Guildford Road side of the right-of-way. The properties on the Kenny Street side of the right-of-way were created on a different plan of subdivision. So in terms of this particular situation, the property was purchased by a father and son team who started renovating the house. We were contacted by an owner of a property on Guildford Road who indicated to us that they thought that potentially there might be a parking structure established at the rear of the property, and that potentially their car parking access might be blocked by those proposed works. So it was actually the concern that was raised by the neighbour on the opposite side of the right-of-way that actually prompted us to check the legality of the applicant, in this case having the right to take access from the right of way. So it quite likely is the only scenario of its kind in the town. All of the other rights of way, in the normal course of events, people on both sides of the right of way would ordinarily have a legal right of access. It's quite an unusual situation that exists in this instance.
Thanks.
Anything further? Thanks, Christian. Okay, so 6.6, proposed review of local planning policy number 4, which is the local planning management and development policy.
I don't understand this. How are we able to have a motion put up, moved, approved, passed, when it's in complete contradiction to our policy?
So you're saying the previous council's decision?
Yes.
That, I guess, is the
$64,000 question.
I just don't understand.
but you will note that you prepared this, did you, Mr. Buttle?
Yes.
So on the bottom of page 24, the comment is made that in light of some of the reports that have been recently conducted by the MRC and Department of Water, that there's some new information that's come to hand and that there is a commitment to undertake a specific review. So you said that possibly that information will be available even for the OCM, if not then in the near future, that would potentially shape our future direction.
Yes, thank you. So the Department of Environment and Regulation are currently undertaking a review specifically of the line between the floodway and the flood fringe in the area to the south of Villiers Street East on West Road. There's 9 properties that are situated within the floodway, and it is possible that the line between the floodway and the flood fringe may be adjusted in that location. And I'm hopeful that I can have some more definitive advice with respect to that in advance of the council meeting next week.
So we've got 4 applications, and are they based on the current policy? So I'm just trying to get the legalities straight here. So if we've got these 4 applications, one was refused and then subsequently approved, but we've got 2 others yet to be determined. If we change the policy now, could the lot 630 and lot 638 retrospectively be able to have their subdivisions approved because they've already applied?
Thank you. Lot 630 and lot 638, those applications are currently on hold, undetermined with the Western Australian Planning Commission. So if the scenario was to change to be more accommodating for subdivision of those properties, then they could be approved under that new regime. They're yet to be determined. Lot 631 is currently still in a SAT review process. So similarly, that one may also be considered in the light of that new information, because that is still an open application to be determined via that SAT process.
And what if we go the other way and determine? What if we go the other way and determine that we're going to not allow subdivisions in the floodplain? What happens then?
Thank you through the chair. That's status quo.
Right. Okay.
Hold on, Councillor Hamilton and then Councillor
So
Benjamin.
following on from that question, is there some because there's inconsistency between a previous council resolution and a policy, is there a requirement of this council to adjust or do a revocation on previous resolutions or not? I'm just curious about how this process
Which
pans out.
resolution are you referring to?
Well, somewhere in here.
Council resolution.
Page 23 at the bottom. Resolution of Council, August 2017.
You've said that there's inconsistency between that and the actual policy, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Well, maybe I've read this wrong. What's the inconsistency then? Maybe I've read this wrong.
So the current policy position is to oppose subdivision of properties that are within the floodway.
Okay, no, I got it right.
Yeah. But this motion supports it.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is, once you've done this review of the policy, well, actually, I guess we'd have to wait and see what the result is of your review before we consider anything else, correct? Right, okay. I just wanted to know the process because it's a little bit, as Councillor Quinton has said, it's a little bit
gobsmacking,
confusing.
Is my word.
So I guess at this stage, all the staff are looking for is support to, based on updated information, to take a look at our policy again and see whether it needs any adjustment. That's really all you're seeking, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay. Are you waiting to see first what the determination is with relation to what 186 and 193? Just in case, I don't know, SAT makes some rulings that are germane to review.
I think they're not progressing them at this stage, are they?
The current situation with the applications that are on hold with the Commission is that they've been held off until a date in May. There's no date set down for the SAT determination, but the owner of that property is actually looking to re-lodge a new application with the Planning Commission. So essentially based on the new situation that exists.
Councillor Gantry had a question. Sorry, Councillor Wilson jumped ahead of you.
Oh, thank you, Worship. I might need my memory refreshed. Why was do you know that why 183 West Road was approved via appeal and what 184 was not? What's the two? What's the differential there between the two, considering they're so close to each other?
I think what happened was the Planning Commission dealt with that application. They did refuse the application. There was an appeal that was lodged against that decision. They have a general reluctance against refusing. As part of that appeal process, they did decide to review their decision and approve. And I think they then decided quickly thereafter that they'd made a bad decision and essentially backflipped again for the subsequent applications because they came very quickly thereafter, but were dealt with it in a different way.
Councillor Quinton?
No, I might just ask this offline. I just want to know which people are we talking about here, and I think the penny's dropping.
So can I, just on that point, there has obviously been some...
No, sorry. Oh, you mean in the housing?
Property owners,
properties.
Oh, no, sorry, I thought you who voted for the motion.
No, she's talking about the property owners.
Yes.
Can I just remind councillors, because I know a number of us have been approached by individuals who have current applications that we have a policy around contact with developers, and so I'd encourage you all to record anything and so it's transparent and on the website.
I want to classify. I mean, now we're drawing long bows with people who are looking to potentially subdivide their properties, calling them developers.
Lobbying council.
Well, that's anybody in the town though with the planning scheme and looking. Well, you know, I haven't had any contact. Happy to declare that for a very long time, but it's a very long bow calling these people developers. Very long bow.
I would say that if someone was going to subdivide and then sell off that land, that they would be making a financial benefit.
So every Battle Axe block that's been... So Councillor Hamilton, you got plans to Battle Axe your block if you're a developer?
We've got zoning, we've got policies, we've got that kind of stuff. We are thinking about changing a policy to allow people to make a benefit financially.
It's just in the process of being transparent and open. That was the only point, not for any other reason. Okay, is everyone happy with this one? Moving on. 6.7, the community group funding request from Eden Hill Community Action Network. No questions? Okay. 6.8, which has to be retitled. There was an error there. This is actually in relation to the Disability Access and Inclusion Plan. Thank you. Is this something updated or?
So this, sorry, councillors, this is the consolidated feedback that has been received that was declared as in the attachments, but I'm advised it was inadvertently left off. So this is.
It's very confusing. Thank you.
So when you, this was the only feedback that was received.
That's correct.
So in the report it mentions consultation with focus groups and public meetings and those kind of consultation strategies. Is that feedback captured?
No, that was part of the consultation process in development of the plan.
Okay, so this is on the plan itself. Right, sorry.
What's the language we're using now? Because I used to work for the Minister for Disability Services, and it was drilled into me that we had to say people with disability. And that's what you've got written here, so I'll shut up.
So I favour access and inclusion as opposed to disability access and inclusion.
Yeah.
On the premise that it is an inclusive process, not to focus on a disability but an all abilities approach.
Very good.
I just noticed one of the recommendations is about, where is the wording? I can't find it. It was about, it was under outcome form, it was talking about potentially having an inclusion officer.
Yes, one of the feedback that has been received is to congratulate the town on the proposal to have an inclusions officer. And another was to query whether or not that position would be for a person with a disability, and the feedback there is that that would be considered at the time. The intent is, if adopted, that it would be, the position would be included in the workforce plan, and I believe it's for an out year, it's not for next financial year, but the following year. And so we would progress it at that time.
Thank you. Councillor Hampton.
May I suggest that if we are looking at access and inclusion as a policy and a plan, that it should be something that is incorporated in the whole organisation, not just for one position. I find that a little bit discriminatory myself. I think that if you're going to look at a process that is inclusive, then surely all job applications should figure prominently in trying to make it inclusive for all people, depending of course on the requirements of each position. But yeah, I don't know, that statement.
No, I agree with you entirely. In fact, when we do advertise, we ensure that it is advertised in all sectors, including through the disability sector as well. So all positions are advertised.
Can I ask how we measure and report on these plans?
So the plan itself does have measurable targets in it, and annually we report to Disability Services with the Department for Communities. That's a legislative requirement to provide a progress report on implementation, and we also report in the annual report. There's a statutory report in the annual report. I am proposing in the next report in the agenda that the People Services Committee have purvey over the implementation process.
Thank you. Anything further?
I just wanted to make a point and ask a request actually. I noticed when this plan was sitting out beside the library, people were then asked to log on to provide their submission. I just wanted to ask, was there an opportunity for people to have written submissions that were then transcribed and...
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Yeah. And what about voice or at Auslan, or were there any of those services?
Yes, so that was part of the rationale for having it available in the library, because those alternative formats were available through the library.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay, so 6.9, this is the appointment of committee members to working groups. I'm just wondering whether this is going to be a confidential item or whether if we're talking about appointing committee members or whether it's going to remain in the main agenda. So
My question won't identify any of the applicants.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm confused by the report because there are 3 different figures.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about now. So
sorry.
No, I'm
That's
just
why
saying when we make a decision, if
Yes.
councillors choose to go with in an option where we're selecting a subgroup, whether it should be discussed confidentially as opposed to in a public forum. But yeah, your question can still be asked now.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's why I paused.
Yeah.
I was waiting for some direction. The report states that there have been 17 nominations. The recommendation says that there are 15 nominations, but I count 16 nominations. So what is it?
It's 17. I'm not sure how you counted 16.
Counted 16.
There's only 16 in there.
Is there? Maybe I better go back.
In the officer recommendation, it says 15 in the highway, but
And the officer recommendation says 15, so are there some missing of this?
No. What you have in those attachments is a complete summary of nominations received.
16.
I count 16. Okay, so we need to amend the recommendation anyway.
So I advised Yvonne that we needed to amend it to 17 from when I presented her with the draft report.
It would be 17 including the council.
No, this would just be the nominees.
So there's only 16 nominees.
The applicants, given some of their quite personal details, were they advised that it might be open to the public? Or
their applications are confidential. Sorry, Councillor Mitchell.
Just a couple of questions, or maybe the first one's a statement. I just noticed in the agenda it says 1 councillor, and we did amend the terms of reference to say a minimum of 1. So maybe just to highlight that there's that slight discrepancy, and for consistency, maybe to put that word minimum back in there. The next bit was, obviously there's a process for appointment of committee members, but what's the process for the appointment of councillors, and how is
It
that?
would be the same as for any other committee or working group where people express interest, and if there's, I guess, if there were 5 people that wanted to do it, we need to decide whether or not that was suitable, considering we've said 1
Maybe we
minimum
should
of
have
1.
a panel set up and an independent consultant come in to let us know which councillor should undertake
I'm not
it.
sure that's
It
necessary.
just didn't say in the officer recommendation
Yeah.
that bit, so I just wanted to clarify whether it would just be a show of hands somehow incorporated within that. That was that bit.
I do note, Mel, that in the attachments it does say a minimum of 1 appointed councillor. So
Yeah, and I
that
guess
has
I was
been-
just saying for consistency, it should probably say that in the agenda.
Yeah.
You know, it's nitpicking, but it should be consistent. And did the officers have any thoughts regards to accepting all of them or a portion of, or any?
Wisdom of Solomon.
Not individuals, but obviously just as a, you know, it becomes a very big group.
16 and accepting 16 nominations received.
You have to hold it in the community hall.
Is still a very large number. Selecting from within is as problematic as accepting
Yeah,
from
we're discussing. And how often would the working group meet? And I apologise if that's been put out there.
It's not specified.
So would
and
that
neither
be
is the time frame of the project, you know, whether it's like the only thing that's referenced is that at the local government election that the committees and working groups dissolve.
Yeah. So how would it be determined about frequency, maybe at the first meeting, or what's the process for that element of it?
The intent was for the working group itself to make that determination.
Okay.
And that it may well be that there are more frequent meetings required at certain times than at others.
Sure. Okay.
Councillor Hamilton?
Can I ask if there's been consideration to perhaps a different format for this working group, in that it seems to me that calling meetings, trying to get people with common timelines and what have you might be problematic. So have the staff considered that perhaps it might be better to reduce the number of physical meetings and communicate with these people in other formats, say for instance like survey type forms, or something that may give you back information that perhaps might be less onerous on the time and energy of all the people concerned?
Yeah, I guess there's two or three projects that we're thinking about at the moment in terms of scope and approach. This is one of them. Graham and I also met earlier today to talk about the community safety and crime prevention plan as well. One of the foundation pieces of work that I think would inform and position both of these projects well is an exercise referred to as asset mapping. So we're not talking about built form assets, but rather the social capital that exists within our community. So talking community groups, networks, services, not-for-profits, etc. And there are a lot of them out there. And I guess it's about understanding what assets already exist within the community and how we can better leverage and coordinate those assets to achieve the outcome that we're seeking. That in itself is a really powerful community engagement and enlightening exercise, and it's actually a realisation of just, I guess, how much we've got going on within our community that we may not be fully aware of. If we talk about crime prevention, for example, a lot of crime prevention strategies are around better coordination and connecting up what's already there. It's not about creating, you know, new strategies or implementing new programs. So I've been talking to Graham about the potential of doing this piece of work, and whether it's you know, for the outcome of community safety, crime prevention or suicide prevention. I think it's about acknowledging what we already have, all the strengths that we currently have within our community, and that in itself I think would be a really useful community engagement exercise to kick off potentially both projects, by bringing people together and allowing them to be part of this process and realising everything that we have, all the strengths within our community. And then it gives us a really powerful understanding then of what we have in existence and where the gaps may be. So looking at it through a suicide prevention lens or a crime prevention lens. So what are the things that are missing? What are the things we need to augment? And what are the things we want to continue to nurture? So whether that might be a useful starting point for both projects. But I found it, having come from Department of Communities, certainly one of the first things we do is we understand the strengths that exist within communities and try and hold on to them, retain them, nurture them, celebrate them, and then work out where the gaps might exist. It also helps in, I guess, avoiding duplication of what already might be in existence, but also wastage of people's time, resources, etc. So whether that's something that might be of interest.
It might actually assist working groups if they actually have an understanding of what's covered and what's not already. So, you know, and it just seems to me that the formatting of just calling a meeting and having a physical meeting once every 2 months or 3 months may not work best for us. So looking at how we can perhaps modify this sort of system to give us better outcomes. At the moment, I don't believe that we're getting us the best type of outcomes from the systems that we've been operating thus far. So that's why I'm asking the staff to consider perhaps outside the box of what's been done previously and maybe looking at a format that might work better.
What's the town team format? Well, how do they gather meetings? How do they just make decisions? How do they?
So once they can either be an incorporated formal organisation or a more informal, but both tend to have positions appointed. So you've got a chair, you've got treasurer, secretary, all those kind of positions as per usual, and then they set their vision and go for it.
Yeah. Because that's kind of how I'm feeling this should run. It's good to have the support of council, and we've got a budget to spend. We've got some motions that we have to fulfil. So there is already a bit of direction for the group anyway. There's the mental health first aid training, there's the roadshow, which I think will take up a lot of time of the working group. But no doubt there will be people coming with their own ideas, and so the town team format might be something that we could replicate for this group, in that they take carriage of it. It's not, agendas aren't written by the council, by the staff here. Decisions are done by the people of the group, not by the staff. So it becomes a community group rather than a council-driven working group.
I still see there being value in doing like the asset mapping like Pete was talking about, though, to give some structure and a framework for the group to work within, so that again they're not duplicating and going down paths that are already being covered, but it's an interesting concept.
And maybe a question for Peter then, how would council express its wish if they wanted to go down the path of what you suggested? Does that need to come in the form of like a line in a formal motion, or is that just consensus?
Graham and I have already had some initial discussions about this, and we've actually arranged to meet with somebody that can actually assist us. So Peter Kenyon, who refers to himself as a social capitalist, or someone of that ilk that can actually facilitate that process. So specialist in asset-based community development. So it's a foundation piece of work that I think will inform lots of things, even town teams. So, you know, bringing together a group of people that may not know what's actually out there, but are committed to doing good for the community, giving them really the toolkit to say, here are all the suite of services and networks and community groups. Perhaps it's about going and talking or coordinating efforts, and then you can recognise the gaps based on what you're trying to achieve. But we're meeting up with someone in the next couple of weeks to see how we might be able to kickstart that process, because I see there's lots of opportunities based on our work program where this piece of information will really, I think, help sharpen our focus and prevent, I guess, a lot of time being lost in people trying to go down their own discovery path and find out what's out there. And yeah.
Can I also, sorry, you finished?
Yeah.
Can I also ask if staff might consider that some, not necessarily this particular group, but some aspects of it might be better managed if, for instance, you have a start date and a finish date, if you have specific objectives, that you might have particular things where you say, right, we want to do X, Y, Z, and we must have this done by June 30 or whatever. I think that, yes, there are some aspects that will keep rolling along, and you might have some people who give direction as like a central group, but I do think that if you have specific aims on projects that come out of this, that it might be better to have specific timelines attached to it.
Yeah, that's the motion. That's the roadshow.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that needs to be done either by the beginning of the cricket season, or
I just meant new projects. I actually understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how does it work? Like, obviously, if those groups report to a committee, then how much autonomy? I mean, in terms of, are they? I guess they're just making recommendations or putting forward things to then be considered at the committee level. Is that my understanding?
So you're saying in the current format that's proposed?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand like how it works, given that we've had this kind of, we're discussing these different.
I guess one of the opportunities, for example, with the community safety crime prevention plan might be the establishment of a finite task force to develop the plan, and then you might look at an implementation approach. So how do you monitor the plan's implementation effectiveness? So for the purposes of a task force, you might actually have a group of representatives from, for example, police, the community, officers, and it may be that councillors get involved in the task force, but it's not a committee as such. It's progressing the development of a plan which then is presented to council. So it's a slightly different model, but it would, I think, allow you to achieve, so for example, something within sort of 4 to 6 months, but you separate, I guess, the task force deliverables, which might be the plan, to the ongoing implementation, which would be something that the town would oversight and report on.
So seeing as we're discussing quite different formats from what we've currently got presented, is there the possibility of, for the council in next week, having like an alternative
Certainly.
Presented?
Yeah, that's, I guess, with my questioning, I was thinking about like how that is captured and how that's articulated.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. 6:11, 6:12.
Checking with
They're the building surveyor and development services determinations.
We didn't talk about access and inclusion, sorry.
Yeah, we did.
Working group.
Oh, you mean the working group,
Oh,
sorry.
and being disbanded, that
Yeah.
element.
I just had some questions about
Sorry.
that. Given that we've got a access and inclusion plan, in the very same agenda, we're going to be scrapping the access and inclusion working group. You haven't. So what's happening? What's happening with the group? We don't have anyone on the group.
Yeah, that's right. So the only nominations that we have received were the two that were received when we were seeking nominations to the committee. That council determined that there was inadequate numbers for the committee to proceed, and hence the working group was established on the premise that it would likely appeal to more, being less constrained by standing orders and rigid structures of committees. But alas, we received no nominations, having advertised for the working group. So the only nominations we do have are those two that were nominated for, that did nominate for the committee, who were happy to have their nominations carried forward to being a part of the working group. That means we could put a working group together, but it would be a limited number of people. The proposal that I've put in the agenda item was that the People Services Committee still have to delay over the implementation process, rather than it being referred to committee from the working group, that I, as an officer, report on implementation to the committee directly.
Ms. Hamilton?
Would it not be, given that we have an access and inclusion plan to be adopted, that gives guidelines to the entire organisation about how to implement access and inclusion across the organisation? So to me, it's not so much a project-based, it's more about implementing processes on an ongoing, continuing basis. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, absolutely.
Right. As opposed to the suicide prevention, which is perhaps looking at specific projects. Access and inclusion is something that should be embedded into the organisation as part and parcel of the mindset.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Should
Happy to move that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so I don't think there were any questions on those last two items. Anything, anyone planning to present motions?
6.11, did we do it?
Yeah. And do you have a question?
There's a lot of full demolitions on this approved under delegated authority. My question is that I don't believe we've got any processes in place at the moment that would analyse how much tree canopy we might lose.
Mr. Dell, this has been what you've been waiting for all night.
In other words, what I'm asking is, these demolitions, full demolitions, are done under delegated authority. Is there anything at all in place at the moment that would allow council to retain trees on private property? No. But.
We do have a tree preservation provisions under this planning scheme at the moment and a policy, but at the moment I'm actually looking into that matter right now, and we'll bring a paper or report back to the March meeting on how we may go about preserving and protecting trees on
You've
development
made me
sites.
very happy, sir.
Is there anything else you want to ask about that?
No, I'm sure that Councillor Wilson is going to.
Having demolished the house, would the owner of the property then get lower rates? Being a vacant block with no house on it?
I couldn't answer that one, but I think we might have to, if you're trying to retain trees, look at some offsets as a way of incentivising tree retention. So that's the sort of things we may need to explore.
Well, I guess what I'm curious about is whether there's an incentive for people who maybe one day are hoping to develop the block to knock down the house so that they can get a rate reduction in the meantime.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work, whether you could give a rate reduction.
Well,
because it's a vacant block.
It makes sense.
Would you agree that because there's no timeline with a full demolition, there's no timeline imposed for a building application to be lodged after a demolition, would you agree that this may affect the volume of rentable properties available in the town?
I can't answer that at the moment.
Okay. Well, if a house is disappearing, it obviously can't be rented out. So it has to affect the number of rented properties.
It may not have been rentable beforehand.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I think we've exhausted that. Can I just ask, are there any other reports that we should expect on the main agenda that haven't been included in the briefing?
The quarterly report.
Yep. Okay.
The town assets
Community of the Town.
Yes, next week.
Yep.
Sorry.
Delighted.
Tina Klein, people.
Okay. All right, thank you everyone. We will close the meeting. What do you think, Claire?